Hi, I'm Ema.
And I'm Ethan.
Ethan and I saw that bias was an issue prevalent in Wilson's classrooms.
So in order to understand the full story, Mima and I decided to create a survey on bias at Wilson.
Of the respondents, 69.4% reported experiencing bias in the classroom.
This bias ranged from racial to gender to political bias.
Here are some of the responses.
These responses to the anonymous survey are read by Wilson High School students, representative of those who took the survey.
My name is Ari Lohr. I'm a junior and I'm a captain on the speech and debate team.
Hi, my name is William Speak. I'm a senior. I've been captain of debate, president of UN.
My name's Sincere Bivens. I'm a 10th grader and I am president of the BSU here at Wilson.
Hi, my name is Rika Zygmunt. I'm a junior and I am involved with the theater arts program here at Wilson High School.
I'm Marcel. I'm a junior and I do track.
I'm Katie Moore. I'm a freshman and I do soccer and lacrosse here at Wilson.
My name's Amy. I'm a senior and I do speech and debate.
I'm Alex. I'm a senior and I do art.
Hi, I'm Yasmin. I'm a junior and I'm in peer counseling.
Hi, I'm Morgan Jessing and I'm a senior at Wilson and I'm part of peer counseling.
I'm Nathaniel Nelson and I'm a junior. Some things I do are speech and debate, band, and Model United Nations.
Have you experienced bias in the classroom at Wilson? What types of bias have you experienced in the classroom at Wilson?
Of the respondents who said they had experienced bias at Wilson, 77% said they had experienced gender bias.
55.6% said they had experienced political bias.
42.2% have experienced racial bias.
Can you list some examples of bias that you have experienced in the classroom at Wilson?
Teachers grading papers based on the opinion expressed, and students with unpopular opinions being unable to talk in class.
Teachers seem to believe ideas and comments are better from certain students, and they only help certain students with things.
Teachers going off on political tangents, and students being disrespectful to one another about their ethnicity or gender identity.
Political bias and slander against Republican and right-leaning views by all teachers.
1. Many teachers seem to grade students down for writing essays that conflict with their opinions. 2. When we were supposed to look at sources from both sides in English, it was still very one-sided.
Bias based on gender directed against females. Bias based on political beliefs directed against conservative beliefs. And not exactly bias, but there is lots of bullying in the male community based on weight and size.
I've heard stories about certain teachers being biased towards or against students.
Republicans are often looked at negatively.
1. Teachers interjecting into student political conversations and correcting. 2. Teachers talking to students who they know personally and being colder to new ones they don't know.
What are some examples of correction that teachers have done in the classroom?
Showing a different opinion from their own. Thought-provoking arguments that don't start with their or a certain perspective, just the facts.
I don't really think teachers have done all that much to correct bias.
Nothing.
What can teachers and staff do to correct for bias?
Having faculty be more open to students about certain policies, as well as being more communicative about their own policies helps.
Have a wider base of opinions and lessons.
Allowing a stronger student voice in the classroom and being open about how their classroom is run. Knowing all expectations expected of the student and of the teacher for the students necessary as well.
Invite all students into discussions and avoid showing strong political bias.
I think teacher awareness of the different individuals and circumstances that are in their class could help them be more friendly, warm, and accepting to all.
Just treat all equally.
Crack down on people using hate speech, especially racial slurs. Teachers should talk more about past atrocities so that people will understand the gravity of what they're saying.
Be less biased. Offer more conservative views.
There was one student who had a deeper story to share.
A lot of the times people will say jokes that are like based on stereotypes of black people, and they'll think it's funny when it really isn't. And that happens, unfortunately, a lot, especially here at Wilson, kind of almost on a daily basis. And yeah, I've had teachers who will actually stand up and say to the entire class that's not okay. I'd say just do that. Whenever you see something or someone acting in a biased way, just tell them that's not okay, it's not right. It's not funny. Anytime that it's class time, just whenever you see something like that happening, just kind of nip it in the bud.
As the students got a chance to share their experience with bias in Wilson, it only seemed fitting for at least one teacher to share what they had seen going on with bias.
My name is Tim Lovelace, and I teach social studies. The last few years, that's been AP Psychology, AP Government, and Philosophy. I've definitely seen bias around Wilson. I've heard biased statements from students. I've seen biased graffiti. I've seen other biased displays. Not always focused around the identity of people. I've certainly seen identity bias happen at Wilson, but I've also seen more ideological bias happen at Wilson. I've thought about this a lot in the past few days, and I definitely have said things that were biased, said things in front of class intentionally, not with an intention to hurt, but I think it's pretty easy for intentions to get lost when biased things get said. Not enough. That's the main thing that I'm thinking about these days, is that I haven't done enough to solve bias. I try to engage with kids. I do think that engaging bias rather than shunning it is the better solution. So I try to engage kids, and I haven't done enough of calling out bias when I've seen it. That's something that I tell myself I'm going to do more. I also try to be open. I try to talk about my own personal biases and be honest about those, especially when it comes to ideology. Creating dialogue with kids, trying to meet kids where they are, and trying to gently reteach unbiased ideas, I think are the ways that I combat bias. I do think that there are some inescapable biases. The best thing that we can do is listen to each other. To listen to the people who are victims of bias, hear what their stories are, hear what their experiences are, and as odd as it may sound, listen to the perpetrators of bias, to hear what their experiences are as well. I think very rarely bias is coming from a place of, I just want to hurt people. I think that bias comes from an honest place in the perpetrators. And as weird as it may sound, listening to the perpetrators of bias with the goal of getting them to potentially see a different way is an important piece.
So, Meme and I made this video because we thought it was incredibly important to share people's stories about bias at Wilson and to give them a platform to tell of what had happened to them and what they thought could be done differently.
We felt that a lot of voices were not being heard, especially in the classroom setting where education is the main priority. A lot of opinions were silenced, and to combat that, or to help us understand where that comes from, we did a survey.
And so we made this video to display the bias of others, or the bias others had faced, but we also had some personal experience facing bias ourselves in different ways, but still impactful to both of us.
Yeah. For example, in my case, just a little bit outside of school, being a woman and being minority combined has kind of had its challenges. When the first thing that people see is your gender or your skin tone, stereotypes tend to come with that, and people tend to judge certain things that wouldn't be said if I weren't a female, or if I weren't black, were said or have been said. In the classroom, when I was an underclassman, I felt that I did not have a voice. I felt that my opinions didn't matter, and that was amplified when we were talking about things that didn't really affect me in certain cases. Even if I did have an opinion, it felt as if I wasn't being listened to.
For me, also, I've definitely experienced some very different types of bias that I think are important to share. The first of this was my personal experience with the debate team last year, where for being Jewish, I was put into a headlock and mockingly beaten up. At that point, I had sort of normalized the anti-Semitism and racism that my team exuded, which was not great, admittedly, but that moment sort of woke me up to the greater issues that were happening at Wilson. And to this day, I still can't go near this person without feeling a wide range of emotions. The other thing for me that I've noticed that I think might be a cause of some of this bias is the shutting down of certain opinions that aren't those that are Portland opinions in classrooms. For example, say someone believes that gun control shouldn't be as prevalent, they're likely not going to feel very comfortable to share that in a classroom at Wilson because of the very liberal attitude that Wilson exudes, which, well, not necessarily being bad that a certain student group exudes one type of group, when it happens in the classroom, what ends up happening is that those views, instead of staying as they are, because the next best thing to voice your opinion is social media, which radicalizes very quickly views, the students become very radical and commit some of these acts of bias that both Mima and I have experienced. And so that for me was the reason for doing this survey. Was I knew it might be impactful to share what had happened to me, but the impact that could happen that could shape the school in more ways than I was even aware of would be amplified by doing a survey and sharing it in this fashion.
It can be as simple as a glance or a look, a stare for too long. Sometimes people ask questions, I've noticed a lot here, especially in Portland, by people who are sort of ignorant or don't know how to address a minority. I've had people ask me if my skin rubs off, for instance, or if they pulled my hair, would it come off? The assumption that something will happen if you were to do something that hurts. and the assumption that I'm automatically different. Anything to build bridges, to get that understanding. And the more we talk about it, the more we understand each other, and the better we can come together and get rid of these bad biases.
Again, for everyone who is in this video, we'd like to say like a huge thank you.
Huge thank you.
And to everyone else who answered the survey or who is just watching this for the first time, thank you so much for sharing and for getting informed and having discussions like Mima and I are having right now to try to solve these underlying causes that are prevalent in destroying our school in many ways. So this is something that's close to my heart that I think is important, and hopefully you found it important too.
Yeah. And we want to thank you for listening, for the sake of listening, and also for going out there. And if you do stop biases that hurt other people, we want to thank you as well, because it takes one person to stop a bias, and it really is a domino effect.
Also, to everyone who allows for a more open discourse that is open but not necessarily harmful, more open in that it makes people who have more conservative or different views feel more comfortable, but that doesn't necessarily harm conservatives or African Americans or Jews or Latino Americans or any group of people. We appreciate that too.
Yeah, definitely. All right, thank you.
Thanks.